tell you how many times where someone would say, "We need a white you." Somebody who can act and do martial arts.
Do you know
I
anybody?
started teaching kids who were a lot like me. So I've been on my own since I was 14. So I experienced a whole lot of.
They say a man's strength is measured by what he can lift, how fast he can move, how hard he can hit. But nobody talks about the weight you carry when the world decides you're not enough before you even get a chance to prove otherwise. Michael Jai White stands today as a living paradox, a warrior with 7 black belts who was never supposed to make it out of the basement where he learned to fight, a Hollywood action star who had to beg strangers on the internet to fund his own movie after 30 years of breaking bones for an industry that never truly saw him. At 58, his body still moves like a weapon forged in fire, but his eyes carry something heavier than any physical blow could ever deliver, the exhaustion of a man who's been fighting his entire life not just for survival, but for recognition that should have been his by right. So here's the question nobody wants to ask: when does a warrior finally admit he's tired? And what happens when the answer is never? Brooklyn wasn't just a birthplace for Michael Richard Jai White, it was a sentencing. Born in 1967 to parents who couldn't hold their marriage together long enough to give him stability, Michael's earliest memory wasn't of toys or birthday parties, it was of silence. The kind of silence that fills a home when a mother loves you so deeply she suffocates you with fear. When religion becomes a shield that protects nothing, when the absence of a father creates a hole so vast, you spend your whole life trying to prove you never needed one in the first place. His mother meant well, she prayed, she worried, she forbade him from the very thing that would eventually save his life: martial arts. She saw violence as a disease that would infect her boy, never understanding that in Bridgeport, Connecticut, where they moved when Michael was still young, violence wasn't something you caught, it was the air you breathed. Bridgeport in the 70s and 80s wasn't a neighborhood, it was a war zone dressed up as a city. The kind of place where ambulance sirens became white noise, where mothers kept their children inside after dark, not as a precaution but as a prayer. Kids didn't play, they survived. Teenagers didn't graduate, they either got out or got buried. Michael watched his friends, the ones who ran the same streets, shared the same dreams, fall one by one into gangs, into prison, into early graves. And Michael knew with a clarity that would terrify most 10-year-olds that if he didn't find a way to become stronger than his circumstances, he'd become another statistic in a city that collected them like trophies. But strength doesn't come from wanting it. It comes from having absolutely no other choice. While other kids were begging their parents for karate lessons, Michael was sneaking into the apartment basement after his mother went to sleep, a space so cold and damp it felt like training inside a tomb. No instructor, no equipment, no encouragement, just a concrete wall, a flickering bulb, and VHS tapes he'd watched so many times the tracking lines became part of the choreography. He taught himself Taekwondo by pausing frames and studying angles, learned Shotokan by mimicking movements until his muscles remembered what his mind couldn't explain, discovered Kyokushin through books with illustrations so unclear he had to guess half the techniques. This wasn't passion, this was desperation in motion, a child building armor out of loneliness because nobody else was coming to save him. He trained until his knees bled from repeating the same kicks on concrete. This wasn't training to become excellent, it was training to avoid becoming the next victim on a Bridgeport street. By age 14, Michael had become someone people whispered about, not with admiration, but with caution. The kid who fights, the one you don't mess with. That reputation became both his protection and his prison, because in Bridgeport, being strong meant you were a target. Being different meant you were alone. Michael defended himself not to prove he was tough, but because going home safely wasn't a guarantee, it was a victory. And every victory cost him a piece of the childhood he should have been allowed to have. In that basement, Michael didn't just learn martial arts, he learned to suppress fear, to console himself, to strive without anyone cheering him on. It was the place where he became a warrior, but also the place where he lost the soul of a child. Then came 1982, and with it a blow Michael never saw coming. At 15 years old, barely old enough to drive, Michael became a father. Not a mentor, not a role model, a father, responsible for a life when he hadn't figured out his own. The cruelty wasn't just the responsibility, it was the impossibility. How do you teach someone to be a man when nobody taught you? How do you provide stability when you're living in poverty? Michael and his son grew up together, a phrase that sounds poetic until you realize what it actually means. Two people stumbling through life, one slightly ahead of the other, both hoping they don't fall. The two lived in poverty, relying on modest income from his mother's odd jobs. Michael still had to attend school, still trained in the basement, still dodged gangs on the streets. But now he had one more responsibility, being a father despite never having been taught how to be a man. Michael often describes those years as a storm, a teenager struggling to survive street violence, suddenly forced to mature twice, even 3 times faster. The most painful part wasn't the exhaustion, it was the knowledge of what happens to children raised in Bridgeport. Michael feared his son would repeat that tragedy, feared the dark alleys and temptations would swallow his boy as well. That's why for many years afterward, Michael tried desperately to steer his son toward the light, but every effort was challenged by the environment, by forces no teenage father could control. From 1980 to 1985, Michael Jai White accumulated 0 awards, 0 titles, 0 recognition, yet somehow managed to forge a will stronger than most professionals who'd trained their entire lives with every advantage he never had. That paradox, talent without opportunity, ability without acknowledgement, became the defining characteristic of his entire existence. He was the seed growing through concrete, not because it's inspirational, but because there was literally nowhere else to go. When he finally made it out of Bridgeport, when he finally graduated high school against odds that should have crushed him, Michael did something that surprised many. He earned a college degree and became a special education teacher, working with students who reminded him painfully of himself. Those kids, the ones classified as hard to reach, the ones with behavioral issues and family situations that made learning almost impossible, Michael saw himself in every single one. He understood their anger because he'd felt it, understood their fear because he'd lived it. That understanding made him effective in ways formal training never could. Teaching gave him purpose and stability, but it didn't give him the thing he'd been chasing since that first night in the basement, the chance to prove that everything he'd survived meant something. So Michael made a choice that looked insane to everyone around him. He walked away from the steady paycheck and stepped into Hollywood, an industry that had chewed up men twice as connected, twice as trained, twice as prepared. And Michael had nothing but 7 self-taught black belts, a body sculpted by poverty, and a belief that if he could survive Bridgeport, he could survive anything. Hollywood had other ideas. The martial arts community didn't trust him because he was an actor. The film industry didn't trust him because he was too martial. He was too black for mainstream leads, too skilled for stunt work, too disciplined for the stereotypes they wanted to cast. He existed in a space where he was too much of everything to fit anywhere comfortably. So Michael did what he always did. He proved them wrong, one audition at a time, one impossible combination at a time. In 1995, he became Mike Tyson, not just playing him but becoming him, channeling fury and power with such precision that people forgot they were watching an actor. It was a performance that should have announced Michael as a serious actor capable of dramatic depth. In 1997, he made history as the first black man to lead a major superhero film with Spawn, a milestone that should have launched him into superstardom. But Hollywood doesn't reward pioneers, it exploits them. Spawn made Michael famous, but it also trapped him. Suddenly, he wasn't an actor, he was a black action guy, a body that could move, but not a soul that could feel. The industry praised his physique, celebrated his skill, and systematically denied him the roles that would have shown his range. And then came 2004, and with it, the cruelest cut of all. Quentin Tarantino personally cast him in Kill Bill Volume 2, one of the most iconic films of the century. The role was perfect, a charismatic martial arts master that would showcase everything Michael had spent his entire life developing. He trained, prepared, and filmed exquisitely choreographed fight scenes. Crew members recalled how his real martial arts mastery astonished the entire set. Tarantino even asked for extra takes to capture the beauty of every movement. But then the unthinkable happened. When the film hit theaters, Michael's entire sequence was gone. No notice, no explanation, no deleted scene on the DVD. A role that could have transformed his career vanished without a trace. It wasn't just a cutscene, it was an erasure, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to be cemented into cinematic history, reduced to a sad anecdote. For Michael, that moment was like standing on the edge of a legendary train, reaching out yet never touching it. Even so, Michael did not collapse. The early 2000s brought strong roles. He starred opposite Jean-Claude Van Damme in Universal Soldier: The Return, went head-to-head with Steven Seagal in Exit Wounds, appeared in the billion-dollar blockbuster The Dark Knight as Gamble, and reached a creative peak with Black Dynamite in 2009, which he starred in, produced and co-wrote. A film praised by critics as the smartest celebration of blaxploitation of the 21st century. But Hollywood still regarded him coolly. Michael Jai White was always excellent but never A-list. Always impressive but not quite a global action superstar. Always present but rarely placed at the center. The bitter truth was that action films led by black actors were consistently undervalued compared to projects fronted by white leads. Many producers admitted behind the scenes that international markets didn't like to take risks with black male leads, a prejudice that suppressed countless talents, with Michael among the most unfairly affected. Despite possessing some of the finest martial arts skills in Hollywood, despite decades of relentless effort, he never received major award recognition. No Emmy, no Golden Globe, no Oscar. And that is the double tragedy of Michael Jai White. A legendary opportunity lost, and a golden career that was never given the light it deserved. Entering the 2010s, while many of his peers had secured stable positions, Michael chose a path few dared to follow, creating opportunities for himself. In 2011, he directed Never Back Down 2, a small project with a modest budget but his first time behind the camera. Without massive funding or a high-end crew, Michael had to operate in full self-reliance mode, directing, teaching martial arts, editing fight scenes, even fixing props when necessary. The film became a favorite among martial arts fans because it carried exactly the qualities Michael promised: realism, speed, and true combat energy. But even that success wasn't enough to open Hollywood's bigger doors. Studios didn't see him as a bankable director. The height of this uncertainty came with Outlaw Johnny Black, the passion project Michael had nurtured for years. It wasn't just a film, it was a love letter to the golden era of blaxploitation, a story Michael wanted to tell in his own voice. But when he brought the project to studios, he received only headshakes. A man with 7 black belts, appearances in billion-dollar blockbusters, collaborations with Tarantino and Nolan, still could not secure a few $1 million to make his own film. So Michael was forced to do something heartbreaking for an artist who had given nearly 30 years to Hollywood: launch a crowdfunding campaign on Indiegogo. He made the pitch videos himself, convinced fans personally, collected small contributions piece by piece. When Outlaw Johnny Black premiered in 2023, audiences loved it for its honesty, its spirit, and the passion Michael infused into every scene. But behind that success lay an industry tragedy: a man with real ability, real reputation, and a long-fought career still had to borrow money just to tell his own story. Somewhere between 2020 and 2023, on a set Michael can't name, an actor holding a prop gun accidentally raised the weapon directly to Michael's forehead during rehearsal. Although the gun was labeled safe and loaded with blank rounds, the actor pulled the trigger. The gun fired at point-blank range. According to Michael, the explosive force from the blank round missed his forehead by only a few millimeters. At such close range, a blank can cause burns, tear tissue, or even be fatal, as proven by Brandon Lee's death during The Crow in 1993. The incident revealed the inherent danger faced by action actors like Michael. In this industry, many projects operate on limited budgets, meaning prop supervision and safety training may not be as stringent as in major productions. Michael often recalls the accident as proof that action acting comes with real physical risks, even when using non-lethal props. But nothing, not the poverty, not the erasure, not the gun, nothing prepared Michael for 2021. His eldest son, the baby he'd held at 15, died at 38 from COVID-19. But COVID was just the final blow in a story written by addiction, instability, and generational trauma Michael had tried to break, but couldn't. According to Michael, his son was hospitalized in critical condition, and the illness progressed too quickly for any intervention to help. One detail that drew public attention was that the son left behind 6 children, making Michael a grandfather of 6 under heartbreaking circumstances. He admitted he had tried to help guide his son through addiction recovery and life restructuring, but the outcome was not what he hoped for. Michael stated plainly, "I tried to help, but ultimately everyone chooses their own life." The loss shattered him for a long time. Many described it as the most devastating tragedy of Michael Jai White's life, surpassing any childhood hardship, career setback, or on-set accident. The tragedy forced Michael to confront a brutal truth. Even with immense physical strength and extraordinary discipline, he could not save the people he loved from their choices or from the dangers dictated by fate. At 58, Michael Jai White still maintains a training regimen nearly identical to his peak years, continuing to practice Kyokushin karate, taekwondo kicks, and high-intensity sparring. However, sustaining such extreme conditioning has forced him to confront chronic pain, lingering injuries, and the natural decline that comes with life beyond 50. Meanwhile, Hollywood's landscape has changed rapidly. A new generation of young action stars tied to superhero franchises continues to emerge, attracting opportunities that Michael's generation can no longer access easily. Though still respected within the martial arts community, his position in the film market is gradually narrowing. His dream of building production studios for action content and opportunities for black performers has also run into obstacles. According to recent updates, the project has faced issues with funding, legal procedures, and construction timelines, leaving expansion plans nearly stalled. Beyond acting, Michael carries multiple roles: director, producer, martial arts instructor, mentor, and frequent interview guest. The workload has drained his energy, especially as he must continue upholding the image of an iron action icon. The tragedy of age 58 does not lie in a single failure, but in the paradox it reveals. The body remains made of steel, yet the heart and endurance have grown weary after more than 4 decades of discipline, staged violence, and personal wounds that never fully healed. But here's what they don't understand about Michael Jai White. The tragedy isn't that he's tired, it's that he refuses to stop. The heartbreak isn't that Hollywood never gave him his due, it's that he kept creating anyway. The pain isn't that his son died, it's that he keeps living, keeps fighting, keeps believing that somewhere in all this suffering there's a purpose worth the cost. At 58, Michael Jai White isn't just a man with 7 black belts. He's a testament to what happens when you refuse to let the world tell you who you're allowed to be. And maybe that's not glory. Maybe that's not the ending Hollywood would write. But it's real. And for a man who spent his whole life fighting to be seen, maybe being real is the only victory that ever mattered. All data, analyses, and commentary in this video are presented based on information available at the time of production. The content is subject to change over time and should not be considered a definitive forecast. There is still so much more to explore, stories of resilience, legacy, and truth. Feel free to dive into some of our other recommended videos, now appearing on your screen.